pleased to have one half of the writing team of Peter Kaufman and Henry Owsley. One half is here to lead this panel. The other half is actually working today. And while he asked Judge Carey if he could possibly take his case while he was here in Palm Beach, he's actually in Delaware doing what he's supposed to be doing, right, Henry?
Well, yeah, he's in front of Judge Walrath this morning, but it would have been much better for him had he been here.
And perhaps been able to have a. I trust. This is the second edition of the Distressed Investment Banking book, To the Abyss and Back, from Henry and Peter. Your third publication, Henry, I think in 4 years now. And very much looking forward to continuing this dialogue that we've had here on this stage twice before now.
Well, thank you. Well, good morning, all. I'd like to introduce our panel. First, we have Judge Carey with us. Judge Carey is a well-known jurist from Delaware, and previously he was the lead bankruptcy judge, stepped down, and continues to be, I think, my favorite bankruptcy judge.
You say that about all the judges, Henry, I'm sure.
I normally don't kiss and tell, Your Honor. He has been extremely involved in the TMA, as earlier indicated, and we're very pleased to have him. Kathryn Coleman from Hughes Hubbard has a long and distinguished history in.
Maybe not too long.
Well, and one of the and obviously works in oil and gas a lot these days. And actually, one of my favorite things about Katie is that she managed to wangle a job as a clerk for the sitting judge in Hawaii out of school, and I've always admired that.
Very impressive.
Ross Gatlin is a serial entrepreneur in the private equity community.
You say that like it's a bad thing.
It's a true thing. It's a thing.
It's the truth. I'm unemployable. This kind of the short story. So I
And
start my own firms.
And he's physically from the oil patch.
That's right. It's in my blood.
Yes, that's exactly right. And you're bleeding over to at least two of your oil investments.
Blood's a good word for it right now.
And so I've spent the last 3 weeks down there. So it's
welcome to the country of Texas.
I'm from Louisiana, so it's not a big move for me. But
yeah, we're in the same country then.
I grew up playing Boo-Ray, actually. And so we have a panel who truly understands entrepreneurs and how all that works. One of the things that we wanted to talk about today was in the current environment that you hear about earlier in the panel about a massive move toward 363 sales where you monetize and put forth a pile of assets on the table where the creditors are going to simply glom onto it. That doesn't leave a lot of room for old equity recoveries or anything like that when you're miles below valuation in a current environment, oil and gas being a classic example. Just to give an indication of how bad it is out there, there was a 363 sale last week for Quicksilver. Roughly $2 billion in debt, 70 million of first lien, 800 and something of second lien. The 363 sale produced a whopping $245 million of value, and it wasn't even oil, it was gas. So that gives you an indication about how dire it is. And if you're representing an equity constituency, a debtor, a founder, an entrepreneur who wants to get something out of it, it creates real challenges today. And regardless of whether you're in the oil and gas business or you are in widget manufacturing, a lot of companies are under pressure, have been always, and in the future, as we see it now with the break in the junk bond market as recently as December, where companies are no longer going to be able to refi, but are going to have to restructure because the refi is probably going to be off the table for many companies that are 5-6 times EBITDA. We love it. Some of the lenders say, well, you know, we want you to sell off assets to pay down debt. Well, for a company which starts off with, say, $10 of debt and $9 of asset value, and if they're forced to sell $5 of assets to pay off debt at 100 cents on the dollar, well, they started off 9 and 10 or 10% underwater. They now sell $5 of assets. They have $4 of assets and $5 of liabilities. Now, 20% underwater. Strikes me that they're going in the wrong direction. And so before embarking on something like that, you need to take a hard look at your values and your capital structure. And, you know, given that scenario, your old equity, Ross, you know, what do? You've got the creditors breathing down on your neck. You know, do you capitulate? Do you buy back debt at a discount? Is that good for you? What are you doing?
Well, you know, first of all, I want to compliment the M&A group on their target marketing and data mining. I'm pretty convinced that somebody's been hacking my emails and that this is some form of an intervention. And everybody's involved in it because you're literally reading my mind, reading my email, and now you've brought me here to confront me about these plans I've been concocting to take an old business that is having market meltdowns and concoct a scheme to bring new equity in my schizophrenic other fund man hat into my old equity situation from my old fund. And how does this work? And the problem is it doesn't work very well, which one side of me says that's good here in America, that we, you know, because it almost becomes a little bit like the Chinese economy. If I can go create efficient capital methods to keep things afloat that maybe don't deserve it, then that could result in zombie companies, which apparently doesn't work well, as we've seen in a number of economies currently, in which others just pontificated about. So on one hand, I'm sort of proud of the American system that makes it very difficult for me to do this in a value-creating way. On the other hand, I'm a little frustrated about the code because it's even worse than what you diagram, right? Not only does it not make much sense on a lot of equity dimensions, but then there's the tax man. And so even worse, if I go buy my, now look, I'm a smart old equity soon-to-be zombie, right? So I've taken my equity and I've converted it into subordinated debt. I've round-tripped it, is what the proper language is. Converted into subordinated debt. Now, as Katie said, you know, I'm hopefully I'm not that old as old equity, but I am getting up there. And my recollection, luckily, I don't do this very often. So the last time I did it, the look-back period was 1 year on converting my equity into sub-debt, and then that being a problem with your honor later. But now it's 2 years. So it's gotten even harder to, you know, make this case. And then there's the tax man. So if I can round trip my old equity into sub-debt to improve my collateral position and become more of a fulcrum security in a future restructuring, which makes some sense typically and traditionally, then I've got a new issue now about having a way of injecting capital into the business to, let's say, purchase that sub-debt. For example, might be a cagey idea, right? Well, when my new affiliate purchases the sub-debt of old co-equity, I've now created something endearing called cancellation of debt income, and that is on the old co. Now, the old co, because good zombie companies, and really that's an unfair term for this one, they have NOLs. So maybe it works to buy the debt and create cancellation of debt income that then offsets the NOL. But gosh, it's an ugly little tax ramification for what used to be considered a nice little asset of companies that have fallen on hard times. It's called net operating losses. So I'm fairly certain I'm here today to get the answer from somebody else, because I've been wrestling with this bear. It's a little bit like the movie The Revenant. If you haven't seen The Revenant, you know, go see it. unless you have a problem with blood and guts.
And
Because
eating raw liver.
I think I just call this my revenant, because the bear is attacking me and I'm trying to stop him, but he just keeps coming, and I'm not sure there is an efficient answer at this point. It's
Well, and again, I mean, you can always have the inter-creditor squabble like the Hateful Eight, to take another blood and guts movie. But, to your question, to Katie, if you posed a question, either the company can buy back the debt at a discount, or you can buy back debt at the discount. The problem is, if the company does it, then you benefit indirectly as equity holder from the discount, but only after the creditors who weren't bought back benefit from that gain, because they're still sitting there and they get the benefit of being a hanger-on here, a free rider. If you're advising the company or Old Equity, is there a conflict of interest, Katie, if Old Equity, as to whether you are using your knowledge of the inside machinations of the company and its prospects to do it for your own account versus the company's account? And how do you advise people on doing that?
Yeah, you've hit on one of my favorite topics, which is the kind of inherent conflict here, and it goes to something you were talking about before, which is kind of the nibbled to death by ducks phenomenon that we see, where management and Old Equity desperately want to hold on to what they've got. People hate change. They want, this is their company. They want to hold on to it, and so they see these interim solutions of, let's sell an asset and pay down debt, and they don't realize that, going back to the revenant, it's their own raw liver that they're eating. They're cannibalizing their company.
That's a good one, Katie. I like that.
Well, I think
that fits with my theme. Thank you. Finally, someone understands. Yes,
exactly.
Eating their own liver.
Wow.
Welcome to breakfast.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, sorry. I hope nobody's still eating. But I was thinking, as you were talking about the newish 2-year look back, maybe that's a very, very disguised blessing for some of these companies, because maybe it forces forward-thinking counsel and management to think, okay, I got to look way down the road here, and if I'm going to do something, I've got to do something that's going to survive that 2-year look back. We've always been talking, when Henry and I are advising companies, I assume you say the same thing I do, which is, for God's sake, at least get enough money to get past either the 90-day, or if you're an insider, the 1 year. Don't do something that's so interim that it turns around and bites you in the you-know-what coming back around. Maybe that 2 years is a gift. But going back to your question about the conflict, it's there. And one of the things that the prior panel talked about, having a plethora of professionals. Of course, this is going to be music to all of our ears, but there's really meaning to it when you're trying to accomplish something. Go out and get an advisor for the company and an advisor for the equity holder, because then when you're in front of his honor in 2 or 3 years and defending this, you can say, well, we were independently advised. There was a conflict of interest. There was a question of whether management can stay in, and this is not management guiding things and desperately holding on. This was really a negotiated transaction, and we had independent advice. It's not that expensive to get that, and it's really buying insurance for that lawsuit down the road.
All right, so let's assume that you have advised somebody, or pick a case where you haven't advised somebody. Regardless of that process, the company then, 2 years from now, past Ross's waiting period, files for bankruptcy. Old Equity has bought, say, 1/3 of the claim. Now, it may not be able to vote it in any plan, but the unsecured creditors committee says those guys should be equitably subordinated. Why? I don't know, because they're bad guys. Your Honor, what happens here, and what do you think of? Obviously, people file lawsuits all the time, as the first panel discussed, for a whole lot of reasons. But this is a common thing. Equitable subordination. They must have done something bad just because they did. How do you react to that?
Well, first, it comes back to the bankruptcy scheme we have in the U.S., which is judicial, right? So that everything that takes place during a bankruptcy has the judicial overtones to it. And what kind of system do we have? We have an adversarial system. Carries over to bankruptcy. Now, it's a little bit different. It's not usually A versus B. It's a multi-constituency that you usually see in the typical Chapter 11. I don't know. On one level, you say, when presented with the situation, what's the aroma? I mean, how does it strike you? How would it strike anybody, really, outside of the courtroom about how things happened and what should happen? As a practical matter, equitable subordination claims come up with some amount of frequency, but are rarely successful. Okay, if they go to conclusion, it's a very difficult thing to prove that somebody did something bad, number one, and that it caused damage. Okay, you have a distressed company where creditors who are out of the money anyway. What's the difference? But as a practical matter, they get resolved. You know, if there's something to be saved, value of the company, someone will make a deal so that the value isn't completely lost, usually. But look, strategery, as they say now,
Thank you.
you know, happens all the time in and out of the courtroom, and you know, just need to recognize it.
Okay, so one of the things that we've talked about is buying debt at a discount, certainly not buying at par if you're underwater. But what about the exchange offer? Is there a reason to do an exchange offer, assuming you can do an exchange offer today in the Marblegate environment, which I will come to in a second, but ignoring Marblegate for the moment, a typical exchange offer might be to give unsecured creditors a secured piece of paper for a longer extension and a collateral interest. Now, my mother told me never to give someone a collateral interest, but assuming that I disobeyed my mama,
Smart lady.
how long, in terms of an extension of maturity, do you need before you think it starts to make sense for you?
Well, they're more fun than a barrel of monkeys. So there's so many issues here. One thing I just want to mention is, you know, the tax man cometh and he doesn't stop. And so one of the wrinkles I've found is that if you do something cagey, like modify the terms of your debt, because there's other answers, right? The answers we're talking about are the really hard ones. There's some other answers that seem really clever, like why don't I just modify the terms of my debt consensually or with the proper hats on and the proper advisors, and they work out a modification of the debt. That seems really smart, maybe smarter than exchange offer, right? The issue is that if I modify the terms of debt in a material way, it can be deemed an exchange. And then I've got the same cancellation of debt issue. So, so now I got to do an exchange offer. And that makes a lot of sense because I've realized that modifying the terms of my debt was smart, but it might be deemed by the IRS to have been in, cancellation of debt. So now before I embark on this exchange offer thing, the question is it really worth it? Now Leonardo DiCaprio, it was worth it for him, okay? Because he the guy did something bad to his family. I don't want to ruin the revenant for you, but he had great faith that he could walk across the water, and at the end of it, it was worth it. And I think that's kind of the wrinkle here. You better believe there's something very special here. You better not be, and I'm not trying to offend people too much this early in the morning, but you better not be a Chinese state-owned, zombie company doing this stuff because you're wasting money, bad money after good, all that stuff. But if there's actually reasons to believe, and there are sometimes, right? Right now when you see not $30 a barrel oil, that's not true. It's $17 a barrel oil. When properly adjusting for currency differences, it's much worse than you thought. Right? But if you realize how bad it is, then maybe it is worth it to preserve some of the value and live to fight another day. And so I think you got to be thinking 3 to 5 years, and you got to have some supernatural reasons to believe that there's some really special value there and that hanging on really makes sense economically for a lot of very well thought reasons.
It's all an option value, and the longer the time frame, the better.
And you can make all these cases for 90-day, 180-day, 360-day, but they're worthless unless you fundamentally believe in 5 years of value as old equity, trying to construct this
And in
thought.
the oil cycle, you are talking about years.
And
right
you got to
now.
be talking about multiples
Yeah.
of value to overcome the tax man, the inefficiencies, the advisory, all these things. You know, it's going to be a very special case.
But again, it's a hard choice for you as, you know, let's say you're a sponsor, you own this company, and you're working with management, you know, going back to Henry's conflict question, you're working with management you like, you trust, you have respect for, and you know they want to hold on to their jobs. And so it's a hard choice for you to say, well, am I honoring that desire of management? Is that what I'm listening to? Or am I really listening to some intrinsic value that to hold on to? Because quite often the real answer to the tax question and the structuring questions and even the should I buy back the debt? Well, the best thing for you to do, honestly, would be to put it in bankruptcy and make a DIP loan, because then you don't have to worry about about the exchange. I mean, the law loves a DIP lender, right? So that might be the real answer, but you know that by doing that, you're putting your beloved management in play. And that's why I always advise, rarely listened to, by the way, which is not a news story in my life. I got kids, or a kid. But I always advise, really management, get your own counsel, because the person who's sitting in the conference room with you for 16 hours a day, figuring out the filing and getting the information and structuring what you're going to do if you have to file Chapter 11, cannot advise you and cannot be the one to say, don't worry, it's going to be okay. I'll make sure that you hold on to your job. That's not debtor's counsel's job. And if debtor's counsel is saying that, he or she is doing the wrong thing. And so there's another advisor that should come in there.
Well, back to your original question, Henry. What do we do? I've found that management has the ability to create a set of projections to fit any aspiration.
Of course.
Creativity.
Yes.
We love it.
Right.
But I also threatened to revisit Marblegate. And with the exchange offer, Marblegate comes up, which is a recent ruling, which is reflected in Caesars right now, which is more litigation. But down in the oil patch where I've been, you've got everybody saying, well, I can't do this, I can't do that because of that ruling, and it's going to force me into bankruptcy where I really don't want to be today. Well, maybe they have to go there, but can you just comment, Your Honor, on a little bit of perspective on what us poor practitioners need to do in this environment?
Not panic, I guess, is the first answer. The community gets really upset when a single judge somewhere, whether it's a bankruptcy judge or a district court judge, makes a decision on an issue of first impression that completely obliterates people's views of what the market has
Like
always
70
been.
years of views?
Kind of something like that.
2 generations.
Look, it's like there are risk factors, right? And that would be one. So you look at the set of risk factors that you have, and you decide where it should fall on the continuum of things where you say, okay, because of this risk factor, we shouldn't do it. I'm not sure yet how severe it is. I think we have to wait and see as the question makes its way upward through the appellate chain and to see where it ends up. During one of our discussions, you said, well, maybe Congress has to do something. We're in a season, right, where Congress is concerned about one thing, holding on to their jobs. So
It's just like management.
Yeah, it's
And hitting us up for money. That's a related question.
Well, that's
Now, Henry, I don't want to forget, because it's kind of miraculous, but there actually is an answer. And I want to tell you at some point before the panel's over, but I don't want to disrupt your flow. But I did actually come up with an answer. But it's an answer that, unfortunately, the reality is you got to do something. And all this other stuff, it'll be great window dressing if you actually get the operational restructuring done that needs to happen to fix the real issues that are driving this calamity. And so, it's a little bit like another movie where they got chainsaws and stuff. So it turns out the right answer is, unfortunately, and this is a safe place. I realize now as you got up and talked about the Zika virus, and I thought I was the only one that was prepared for the next apocalypse constantly. with my $1 billion of dry powder ready and waiting for great calamity, which I don't wish on the world, but unfortunately know is coming. But the Zika virus is new and its own version of frosting on the apocalypse that is coming. But the long story short is the right answer was mentioned in the last panel where briefly about operational restructuring. The right answer is let's see if we can actually fix the underlying issue. And it turns out I actually came up with a projection where I improve excess collateral over debt by, unfortunately, sawing the 2 arms off the torso, sawing half a leg off the patient, tourniqueting everything, and starting to sell excess assets, which is difficult to do, and creating value to reduce my leverage dramatically in anticipation of the need to do some other things. And so there's ways, but they involve actual work and actual, fixing and solving of difficult issues, and unfortunately, reductions in force.
But Henry says in his book, you can't shrink your way to greatness. How do you respond to that?
Great line.
Well, but I know Henry's a thinking man, and he would tell you that when your collateral is shrinking, and I'm reminded of Lily Tomlin's movie, The Incredible Shrinking Woman, if you remember that. But when your collateral shrinks, it's not shrinking your way to greatness. It's sort of tightening your belt loops to the reality of your current weight, right? So when your collateral shrinks 50%, then you're not shrinking to greatness. You're just preparing to fit into your new trousers.
To use your movie metaphor, my now
I got one more, by the way.
My now 19, then 5-year-old son coined a phrase, the Texas Chainsaw Manicure, which is what
There you go.
what you're talking about, which is not quite the full Monty there.
So we reduce. So literally, and this is horrible, right? So 2 days ago, we lay off 33 people. 2 weeks from now, we'll lay off another 15.
But
And
then,
we'll close we'll close 50% of our operating sites, and then we circle the wagons around one key location, and we have a skinny version of another. I slash corporate to a shadow of its former self, and all of a sudden, I've got a cash forecast that actually is realistic, and a patient that might survive trauma. And this is a questionable sign, but the plan is called the Alamo Plan. And so if
is that the movie reference? Remember the Alamo?
Texas history might concern you about something called the Alamo Plan, but I can explain it to you. But in our case, it's okay if Santa Anna invades and takes us over. And part of the Alamo Plan is, in fact, to force Santa Anna to take us over. But anyway.
So effectively, what you just described is the kind of marking to market that the fear of which impels anything but bankruptcy kind of strategies, that the kind of thing Henry is talking about that he's seeing down in the oil patch. But you're doing it outside of a bankruptcy. Why?
Well,
Because you want to hold on to it.
Well, because unfortunately in this case, which you guys see all the time and understand, this company can't sustain bankruptcy. It's not American Airlines, right? It's not United Airlines. It can't sustain the cost of bankruptcy. That would actually have a negative impact on the projection of improving collateral. So we actually got to do stuff that fixes it. And it's really sad, but I found the only way to get all the delusional people to have a sober moment, a moment of clarity, I think they call it. It was to deny the company capital and let it teeter on negative over advances and going into liquidation, and out popped a spreadsheet from the wonderful controller that said, I think this might work, and
So it was like Alien, another movie reference.
yeah, exactly. So the invasion of the body snatchers, and out popped a healthy, profitable, core focused business, but it involved cutting off our arms, half of our leg, and then proceeding forward in some form of a wheelchair. And that's no offense.
So you're saying
no
that-
offense to people,
You're saying that our industry has, we are hoist on our own petard by making bankruptcy so expensive, partly by dint of hiring all the extra advisors that I was talking about. So that's another reason to avoid it, because it's too expensive to
it's
go
kind
through.
of a lower and middle market issue, which a lot of people are familiar with. And so we use crazy things like Article 9 because, we're not American Airlines or whatever.
All right.
It's
But-
coming back
I-
into vogue, Article 9.
I've done 3 of them in the last 3 years. I think I only found one law firm that said we could, and so I went with them. Everybody else said, no, you can't do it.
I must sound like, pardon me, Jack Butler, because, I couldn't agree more with the need to make it more affordable
It's
for
true.
the middle market
Where's
companies.
where's the Southwest Airlines of bankruptcy?
Yeah.
It's America.
No.
There's 197,000 $10 to $500 million revenue companies. It's unlike any nation in the world. You won't find it in Korea. You won't find it in Japan. You won't find it in Germany. And we got to find a way to fix this stuff and help these companies grow and evolve. And they're not American Airlines. It's not United Airlines. It's not Enron. They're small. They don't have money. They can't sustain 9 months of great, travail.
All right, we've been talking a lot about the energy companies and that particular type of situation. There's another situation, it's why Peter's not here today, healthcare. A lot of the business models in healthcare were raise money from the public markets, fund a business plan designed to flip it to a big corporate buyer down the road. Meanwhile, all the losses would be funded by the public, raise equity and debt to do it. And so many of these companies have huge cash burns. Their stock prices have gone from $20 to 20 cents, and their market cap is a fraction of their debt, but they still have a whole bunch of cash on their balance sheets that they're burning through. And obviously the creditors in this situation might want their cash to be returned to the creditors. Old equity is saying, wait a minute, I am still holding on to all of this stuff in a covenant-light situation. I don't have to do anything. Hell, I might go to Vegas and put it on, some high-risk, high-return thing. And, if you don't want me to do that, make me an alternative proposal. So how do you react to that, Ms. Coleman?
Well, I think that's exactly the reality of what's happening. You use it as a negotiating lever. Yeah, you can go to Vegas, and not only that, but there's not really very much downside. If it doesn't work, are you really any worse off than you didn't want to use the cash to pay down debt at 100 cents on the dollar anyway? If you go to Vegas and it doesn't work, you do always have the option of an enforced discount in the form of the absolute priority rule in Chapter 11. So I would, honestly, it would take a very special situation. I'm not going to say never, but it would be surprising for me to advise a company to, you want to take the proceeds of that asset sale, and even though you don't have to, use it to pay down debt at 100 cents on the dollar, because you're also going to tick off. You're going to tick off other creditors when you do that.
You sure are. Now, let's assume a company does that and it doesn't work, and then shows up later on your doorstep, Your Honor, and people are complaining about these guys took a high-risk, high-return strategy when they could have paid me back, lost. Is this noise to you? Do you care? Is there something actionable here?
Well, if it's really Vegas and you went to the craps table and spent the night with Trixie, that's an easy one, okay? But the legal standard is, did what the company undertake, does it protect the D's and O's? Does the business judgment rule protect them? Look, and I think the law pretty much says companies can do things that even when they don't work out, there isn't liability for having done them. But I think everyone would agree you need to be more careful in a situation in which you're in the so-called zone of insolvency or not. Is it noise? Well, there's always a lot of noise in a case in which there's lots of creditor claims and not enough assets to go around. So it doesn't matter whether you're the first lien lender or you're at some point in the sub-debt category. Everyone's going to fight for what they think is their fair allocation of estate resources, and they'll undertake whatever strategy they need to do to try to force the point.
All right, let me change the topic a little bit. Earlier, the panel talked about internecine disputes among creditors or other constituencies, and in a zero-sum game, your value is maximized by taking from other people. And one of the things that we wrote about in the book, and matter of fact, inspired by a case that we had in front of you.
I'm rarely referred to as creating inspiration.
But
Today, it's
Yeah,
true.
yeah.
it happens. And let's assume that you've got an out-of-the-money constituency, a sub-debt group, in a case where the value stops in the senior debt. And it's pretty obvious, but maybe there's a valuation fight. But the sub-debt puts on a large valuation fight. How do you react to that? Do you encourage the process of an expensive valuation fight? Do you try to bring people together to bang heads somewhere out in the corridor? How can you control this? Because it frequently gets, to the practitioner sometimes, a little out of hand.
Well, it's very difficult to control in a large case where there are assets to fight over. But I guess from a judicial strategy standpoint, I think about a couple things. First of all, I have a calendar, and I can decide whether to schedule a motion for hearing next month or 4 or 5 months from now. So I tried to decide the things that are central to making the case move along, to guiding the parties to a place where they can come to consensus if it's possible. After hearing argument or evidence, I'll, even if I don't rule on something, I may give the parties my views preliminarily about what's been presented to me. That often causes parties to make arrangements to get to a place of consensus. Sometimes it's not the professionals, it's the clients, right? And the professionals need to go back and tell the clients, here's what the judge said. He hasn't made a decision, but these are his thoughts, and you better listen to him. Sometimes we do mediation. Actually, Judge Drain has handled some of the toughest mediations in some of the cases we have in Delaware. And then sometimes you try to bang heads a little bit. It's hard. Everybody's entitled to their day in court, but not necessarily when.
Well, one of the things, and Katie, I'd like your reaction to this. It's not necessarily the valuation fight itself that's going to drive the recovery of the junior creditor. It's in a fragile situation, which some businesses are, that you can cause enormous business damage by having a protracted, ugly litigation fight in a Chapter 11, which is then used to threaten the more senior creditor into capitulating. How do you react to that, either offensively or defensively, in terms of your practice?
Well, I mean, I try to avoid it because there's nothing that will kill a case and make it be one of these expensive, clusters that just go on forever than having litigation in the case, which is why I think we're seeing so much of the, get the sale over with and figure out what's there and then fund a litigation trust. I mean, among other things, the decision in ASARCO scares all the professionals because they don't want to be they don't want to be bringing the debtor's claims against a creditor who might win in the litigation and then object to their fees for, you kind of got an unfair situation where the creditor, if it chooses to do so, and there may be very valid reasons not to, but if it chooses to do so, it can spend litigation dollars without worrying about how it comes out, because if you lose, there are courts, and I don't think Judge Carey is one of them, but there are judges who will penalize the loser, the substantive loser, by denying the fees. And even if that doesn't happen, then you've got the ASARCO situation where I know that was a bonus, but the language of the decision doesn't say it's only limited to bonuses.
Doesn't leave a lot of room that way.
It doesn't. It really doesn't, and it's pretty scary. It's pretty scary for the professionals. So my reaction is let's not have that litigation here and now. Let's get a sale. Let's get a plan. Let's get all the disputes deferred. It doesn't always work because there are aggressive junior creditors, and the problem, as you say, the valuation fight. In the situation you're talking about, the Quicksilver case, you could have had a valuation fight come in at 600 and one come in at 100, it wouldn't have mattered, because even if the 600 million guy was right, you still wouldn't have made it your way through half of the equity stack or half of the capital stack. So who cares? You know, it's a litigation fight. You have to do more aggressive things like the equitable subordination, the recharacterization, the going after the D's and O's for everything they've done in the last 2 years.
Well, we talked about that a little bit before this, that many of these cases are ending up with litigation trusts, and that trend appears to be continuing. If I'm an old equity constituent, if I'm a board member, the only reason I'm going through this process and being nice to people is to get a release.
Yes,
If at
of
the
course.
end of the day, I don't even get a release, what am I doing?
Yeah,
speak to that.
and this is a question that used to come up all the time, right? I used to get the question all the time: can I resign from the board? I don't want any of this. I want to run away from this. And the answer, of course, is, well, you can, but even if you do, you're still liable for everything that you've done up until today, and it's not going to look too good for you if you're the one guy running away from the ship. And if you stick around, maybe you can make things better. And I think that's probably still the answer. But the unfortunate reality is that by purchasing the D&O insurance, you are perversely almost assuring that you're going to get a lawsuit. If there's no insurance, nobody's going to sue, because what are you going to do? Sue a bunch of board members? I mean, it's the rare board member that has that kind of resources to really make a difference here.
But you're not recommending not to get insurance.
I'm
are you?
certainly not recommending. Well, I have a feeling that you would have something to say about a debtor who came in without D&O insurance. Of course you have to have it, and of course you have to have it for the things that the decisions that the directors have to make in the bankruptcy. So no, I'm absolutely not recommending that, but it is an unfortunate consequence. Maybe I'm recommending getting a slightly smaller policy. No, I'm not.
Right.
No, the limits are only X.
You don't need the second. You don't need the excess.
Yeah, exactly.
One of the things that actually has been discussed in an ongoing case that I'm in Delaware that I've talked to Judge Carey about this morning.
It's not my case.
It's not his case. He's not his fault. Is that the officer directors do care about releases which they're not likely to get. And one of the things they were talking about is, in a connection with the 363 sale, one of the lots to be the causes of action. And maybe even they might credit bid on that. Any thoughts about that kind of strategy?
Well, here's what's been happening in the 363 cases, which we see so many of has been mentioned, is what happens afterwards. Well, there's a debate now. The bankruptcy code says there are three ways out of a Chapter 11: conversion to Chapter 7, dismissal, or a confirmed plan. But a lot of courts, including ours, and I've done it, have entered orders approving what are called structured dismissals. Sometimes they contain releases. So even if there's not to be a confirmed plan where the D's and O's could get their releases, possibly, I see people asking for them in structured dismissals. And, depending on the circumstances, it may or may not be appropriate to include them. I mean, there is an argument, and the ABI Commission has actually said, we don't think there should be structured dismissals. Congress intended there be the 3 exits from 11, and we think that's what ought to be. But in a case in which you don't have a confirmed plan, which is, I think, still the most elegant exit from a Chapter 11, dealing with those kind of liabilities and getting people out of potential trouble and potential claims is a problematic situation, I guess.
Yeah, well, we're seeing it in spades, and I think that's going to continue for the next few years. Anyway, with any other comments or thoughts before we wrap up?
You've opened Pandora's box with this discussion about D&O, and I think you're literally trying to get my blood pressure up and get me on a rant early in the morning.
You want some more coffee?
Apparently, I'm going to need something stiffer than coffee earlier in the day than I suspected, because this D&O thing, nobody is a better client of the insurance companies than Ross Gatlin. and by the way, insurance have been very, very good to me. So I'm very thankful for insurers. Now, I've learned a lot of interesting things over the last several years about insurers. One thing that you might not know, and they certainly didn't bring it up at the premium signing, is that the third don't pay. So have you ever heard that? I guarantee you it's not in the policy, third don't pay. So when you layer up the insurance like you're supposed to cover all contingencies, now I've got a deal where the same policy exists between the first, the second, and the third. The same policy. The jot and the tittle. Every detail is the same. The first paid, because it's a clear claim. The second paid. Third don't pay. I wish I would have known that when I was doing the premium.
Did you pay him a premium?
Well, I did, because I thought they paid.
Right.
So don't get me started. And then the other thing about D&O is, I was raised in the early 90s, the first restructurings with these former Gibson, Dunn, and Crutcher guys, and, restructuring is a carnivore's game. It's blood and guts. That's why I love your comment. And D&O, fraud, negligence, gross negligence, that stuff used to matter. Now, with the Bernie Madoff age, if you didn't steal $1 billion and you didn't kite checks and you didn't grab it straight from the till, where's the sin? It used to be wrong to create projections that were false. It used to be wrong to concoct a plan that wasn't true and try to foist it on everybody. Now, I think that's just accepted. That's just business. So what is a sin now? Where's Leviticus? What's the truth? It's really a fascinating question. And, so man, you got me going now. This D&O thing, I think you still have to get the insurance. I think, I think the world has shifted in terms of what is true gross negligence now, because the perception of gross negligence seems to have changed. And it's difficult for guys like me who grew up in an industry where things like a false set of projections and incorrect data and the wrong information and a plan that didn't actually make sense, that was gross negligence to me, and it still is. So you know what? I've decided I still fire people when they do bad things, regardless of the consequences.
But that's protective to you.
You know what I mean?
Right?
You gotta make
protective.
In the end, you gotta do the difficult things about the operational restructuring. You gotta do the difficult actions, and then these other solutions. The clouds part, and you see answers. But only after you do the heavy lifting of fixing the actual problem in the company. And that's where you'll find whether any of these solutions have merit or not, is if there's an actual solution for the company. Otherwise, you might as well hand it to the advisors now and let them wrestle over the carcass.
But don't you think that by doing the hard thing, you're also making a statement to your creditors? And you're not, you are affirmatively telling your creditors by your actions, hey, we're not just clinging on to the way things are. We're not going to take advantage of the covenant light and go to Vegas. And I think that with most creditors, I think that goes away because a lot of assuming not an absolute loan to own strategy that's just out there and you know what you're getting into and you don't have any other choice. Assuming you've got a lender who would just as soon see the company make the hard choices and succeed and will only move in and be really aggressive if it sees that the company is not doing those things. So I think, it is hard. And when you first started about the operational restructure, I was gonna question, well, what is an operational restructure in the world of oil and gas, the world of nickel? Where your commodity, your business just ain't there. The world of healthcare, where it's 10 cents on the dollar. But you're saying that you skinny it down to fit your new trousers.
There you go. It's called reality. My dad used to talk about it a whole lot, and embracing reality in a sober way and dealing with the real problem. That's the first step.
All right. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
Katie, great job. Thanks.